Yesterday, National Public Radio published a story about young people who cannot find work. It quoted a Stanford economist and a number. Early career workers in jobs exposed to artificial intelligence, it said, have seen a 16% relative employment decline. That number is real. It was calculated carefully by serious people from administrative payroll records covering millions of American workers. It is also about a year out of date. The paper it comes from was revised this month. The figure the authors now put in their abstract is 19%, and the 16 is not an earlier version of the 19. It is a different statistic entirely from a different method the authors have since stopped leading with. I want to be precise about why that matters because it is not a gotcha. It is the whole story. There are 4 serious research efforts trying to answer one question. Is artificial intelligence destroying entry-level jobs? They use payroll records, job postings, corporate card spending, and government surveys. They reach conclusions that read, in the press, as flatly contradictory. One reports a 19% shortfall for young workers in exposed occupations. Another says the companies spending most on AI are hiring the most. A third says the real culprit is not AI at all, it is working from home. Here is my thesis. Those studies contradict each other far less than the headlines do. Every one of them says, in its own text, that it has not established what caused what. The strongest paper on the alarming side spends 4 pages arguing against itself. The study most often used to prove AI is innocent is counting the wrong thing to answer the question. And the honest position in August 2026 is uncomfortable and specific. Something has gone badly wrong at the bottom of the white-collar ladder. It is measured, it is real, and nobody has demonstrated that artificial intelligence is the reason. Let me show you the working. Chapter 1, the number is a subtraction. Start with the sentence everyone quotes and read it slowly. Employment of young workers, ages 22 to 25, in AI-exposed occupations now stands 19% below where it would be had it kept pace with that of their less exposed peers. 19% below where it would be had it kept pace with their less exposed peers. Not one word of that sentence says employment fell 19%. It says a gap opened between 2 groups, and the gap is 19% wide. The paper gives you the 2 halves. Between November 2022 and June 2026, employment of 22 to 25-year-olds in the 2 most AI-exposed quintiles of occupations fell about 11%. Over the same period, employment of the same age group in the 3 least exposed quintiles grew about 10%. 11 down, 10 up. A divergence of 21 percentage points, which the authors express as 19% relative to the growth of the comparison group. So there is a real decline, 11% of jobs gone from the exposed end of the market for people in their early 20s. That is not nothing, it is a lot, but the headline number is not that decline. The headline number is that decline plus the growth somewhere else. And if the comparison group had merely held flat instead of growing 10%, the same underlying collapse would have produced a much smaller headline. This is not a trick the authors are playing. They are extremely explicit about it. In fact, they switched to this measure precisely because it requires, in their words, no modeling choices. It is the simplest thing you can compute. That is its virtue. But it means the number is a subtraction between 2 moving quantities, and when it travels, the subtraction gets lost. People hear 19% and picture a fifth of entry-level jobs disappearing. What is actually being described is a widening distance between 2 groups of young workers, driven partly by one group shrinking and partly by the other group doing fine. And notice what the 2 halves imply together. The 3 least exposed quintiles grew 10%. Young people are being hired, somewhere. Whatever is happening is not a general collapse in demand for 22-year-olds. It is concentrated, and it is concentrated in a specific place. That specificity is the paper's strongest card. It is also, as we will see, the thing that makes every alternative explanation so hard to rule out. because artificial intelligence is not the only thing that arrived in white-collar knowledge work between 2020 and 2022. Something else did too, and it went to exactly the same occupations. Chapter 2, 13, 16, 15, 19. Before we get to the rival explanation, I want to finish the story of the number, because the trail it leaves is unusually well documented, and it tells you something about how research becomes news. The Stanford paper has been revised repeatedly. Here is the lineage, taken from the August 2026 version, where the authors lay it out themselves rather than making you reconstruct it. The first version, published in August 2025, headlined a regression estimate that adjusted for firm-level shocks. On data through July 2025, that estimate was a 13% relative decline. A later revision, on data through September 2025, put the same regression estimate at 16%. Then the authors changed their emphasis. They moved away from the regression figure and toward the simpler descriptive measure, the kept pace shortfall, because it requires no modeling assumptions. On that measure, the shortfall was 15% at the July 2025 data vintage. As of June 2026 data, it is 19%. So there are 4 numbers in public circulation: 13, 16, 15, 19. 2 of them come from one method, 2 from another. All 4 are correct as stated. None of them is interchangeable with any of the others. Now go back to the National Public Radio piece from the 18th of August, 2026. It says 16% in the present tense, describing what has happened since late 2022. 16 is the September 2025 vintage of the method the authors have stopped leading with. It is not wrong so much as it is a photograph of a moving object, taken 11 months ago, captioned as if it were live. I do not think that reflects badly on the reporter. I think it reflects something structural. A revised working paper does not send out a correction notice. The old number keeps living in every article that ever quoted it, in every summary trained on those articles, in every search result. The new number has to fight its way past all of them. And here is the part that should genuinely bother you. The drift in this case went in the direction that makes the story milder. 16 is smaller than 19. The stale figure understated the current estimate. Usually when we worry about numbers drifting, we worry about escalation, about hedged findings becoming striking ones. This one drifted the other way, and it still traveled because nobody was checking. Which raises the obvious question. If a widely read outlet, quoting the author himself, in a careful piece explicitly about how economists disagree, can carry a figure that the source document had already superseded, what is the state of every other number you have absorbed about this subject? I went and looked. The answer is not reassuring, but it is interesting, and it is not what I expected. The most misrepresented paper in this debate is not the alarming one. Chapter 3, the paper argues against itself. If you only ever read one thing about artificial intelligence and jobs, I would not send you to the coverage. I would send you to sections 4 and 5 of the Stanford paper, where the authors spend several pages listing the reasons their own finding might not mean what it appears to mean. They flag 3 problems, and they say plainly that they address them directly rather than in passing. The first is timing. More exposed and less exposed occupations were already diverging before ChatGPT existed, particularly around the pandemic. If the lines were separating in 2021, a technology released in November 2022 cannot be the reason they were separating in 2021. The second is education. When they add a control for the education level of an occupation, the estimates attenuate. In their own words, education is the one control that produces the greatest attenuation. They offer a fair rebuttal. Education might not be a confounder at all. It might be the very channel through which artificial intelligence operates, because what large language models are good at is precisely codified, credentialed, written-down knowledge. That is a reasonable argument. It is also unfalsifiable in this data, and they know it. The third is external validity, and this is the one that nearly changed my mind. The payroll panel is not the United States. It is the client base of one payroll processor. So the authors checked their result against the American Community Survey, the Census Bureau's own instrument. Over the 2022 to 2024 window where both exist, the gap between the most and least exposed quintiles is minus 0.132 in the payroll data. In the census survey, it is minus 0.022, with a confidence interval running from minus 0.055 to plus 0.011. Read that again. The payroll gap is roughly 6 times larger, and the census interval crosses 0, which means that in the government's own survey, over that window, you cannot reject the possibility that there is no gap at all. They test whether that is a coverage artifact, restricting the survey to full-time civilian wage and salary workers, the population the payroll data covers. It barely moves, so it is not about who gets counted. To their credit, they do not bury any of this. They also report where the two sources agree and where they part company. Within professional, information, and financial services, they agree closely, minus 0.231 in payroll against minus 0.213 in the survey. The disagreement is concentrated in education, health, and public administration. And they note that the Census Bureau substantially revised its 2024 population weights after changing how it estimates net international migration, which may account for part of the discrepancy. So the finding is strongest in exactly the white-collar sectors this debate is about and weakest everywhere else. That is either the signal appearing where theory says it should, or it is the one corner where a payroll processor's client base looks most like the country. Both readings are available on this evidence. Against those 3 problems, the authors set 4 counterarguments, and they are good ones. The gap kept widening through mid-2026, long after interest rates peaked, so a monetary tightening story struggles. By November 2022, the relative position of exposed occupations had already returned to roughly its pre-pandemic level, so the subsequent decline pushes past that baseline rather than merely reverting to it. The declines load specifically on occupations where AI is used to automate rather than to assist, with a clean age gradient. And United States government administrative data show consistent raw patterns. Then comes the sentence that should be the headline and never is. We caution that this work does not estimate a causal impact of artificial intelligence. These are descriptive facts, and ongoing work is needed to determine how much they are caused by the spread of generative AI rather than merely correlated with it. That is the authors of the most cited alarming paper in this literature, telling you they have not shown AI did it. They call their findings canaries in the coal mine. A canary is an early warning. It is not a diagnosis. So if not AI, then what? There is a specific rival with a specific paper and a dataset far larger than Stanford's. Chapter 4, The Broken Ladder. On the 1st of June, 2026, 2 researchers named Peter John Lambert and Yannick Schindler published a working paper through the Center for Competitive Advantage in the Global Economy at the University of Warwick. Number 808. They called it the broken ladder. Their opening question is the one everyone is asking. Is generative artificial intelligence replacing junior workers? Their answer is that the growing literature saying yes has reached a premature verdict, and they name the reason. Exposure to generative AI is strongly correlated with exposure to another post-pandemic shock: working from home. Think about which jobs a language model is good at: writing, summarizing, coding, drafting, analyzing documents. Now think about which jobs could suddenly be done from a kitchen table in 2020. It is very nearly the same list. Any measure that ranks occupations by AI exposure is, whether it intends to or not, also ranking them by how remotable they are. So Lambert and Schindler went and separated the two at a scale that is genuinely hard to argue with. 243 million new hires, 407 million online job postings, 4 countries: the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia. 9 years, from 2017 through 2025. Difference in differences designs at the occupation level, the region level, and the firm level. Here is what they found, and I am going to quote the abstract because the precision matters. When estimated separately, a 2 standard deviation increase in generative AI exposure and in work-from-home exposure each predicts, by 2025, a fall of around 5 percentage points in the junior share of new hires and around 3 percentage points in the share of job advertisements requiring limited experience. Each separately, both technologies look guilty when you interview them alone. Then they run them together. Estimated jointly, the work-from-home effect remains, while the generative AI coefficient attenuates sharply and is often statistically indistinguishable from zero. That is the finding. Put the 2 suspects in the same room, and one of them stops looking like a suspect. And there is a mechanism that makes sense of it, which David Deming of Harvard laid out to National Public Radio this week. Hiring a junior person is an investment. You are paying someone who cannot yet do the job in exchange for the person they become in 18 months. That transfer happens through proximity. Overhearing calls, being pulled into a meeting, someone glancing at your screen. Remote work does not remove the junior worker's ability to do tasks. It removes the employer's ability to teach them cheaply. And simultaneously, it widens the geographic pool from which that employer can hire someone senior who needs no teaching at all. Deming adds a timing observation that lands hard. Look carefully, he says, and the decline in junior hiring started something like 6 months before ChatGPT was released. If that is right, the canary was already sick before anyone opened the mine. Now, 2 excellent teams, 2 enormous datasets, opposite conclusions about the same coefficient. Somebody has to be wrong. Except that when I read what each of them says about the other, that is not quite what is going on. Chapter 5, The Same Test, Different Data. Most public disagreements between researchers never actually meet. One team publishes, another team publishes something incompatible, and the 2 papers sail past each other while journalists pick a side. That is not what happened here, and this is the part of the story I find genuinely admirable. Section 4.3 of the August 2026 Stanford paper is titled Reconciling Remote Work Estimates. In it, Brynjolfsson, Shandar, and Chen state that their findings contrast with the estimates from Lambert and Skindler. Then, instead of dismissing them, they do the thing you always wish researchers would do, and they almost never do. They rerun their opponent's test on their own data. In their online appendix, they follow the empirical specification in the Broken Ladder paper as closely as they can. And they report that in their data, AI exposure continues to predict a decline in the junior share of new hires even after accounting for work from home. So the same specification produces different answers on different datasets. The Stanford authors draw the only conclusion available. The results vary because of differences across the datasets. Theirs is administrative payroll data from a payroll processor. Lambert and Skindler's comes from online professional profiles and job postings. Sit with that for a second, because it changes what kind of disagreement this is. This is not 2 teams disagreeing about economics. They agree about the theory. They agree that AI exposure and remote work exposure are tangled together. They agree the untangling is the whole game. They ran the same untangling procedure. It came out differently depending on whose records of employment you use. Payroll data knows exactly who was on a company's books and exactly when, because a real payment cleared. But the sample is whichever firms use that payroll provider, and the Stanford authors concede their sample may not fully reflect new business formation. Online profile and posting data covers far more of the labor market and 4 countries, but it measures what people and companies chose to publish about themselves, which is a different thing from what happened. Neither is the truth. Both are proxies. And the answer to a question this economically important currently depends on which proxy you picked. The Stanford authors are candid about where this leaves everyone. These analyses comparing AI and work from home, they write, are descriptive prediction exercises and not causal. Future work, they say, may seek to further separate the causal impacts. And they note something that makes the separation even harder. Firms that adopted remote work were subsequently more likely to adopt generative AI. The two shocks are not merely correlated across occupations. They may be causally chained at the level of the firm. If you wanted to design a problem that resists identification, you could hardly do better. Two shocks, arriving within about 2 years of each other, landing on the same occupations, in the same firms, in an order that runs from one to the other. That is the honest state of the causal question. Now let me deal with the study that is constantly used to declare it settled in the other direction. Chapter 6, Counting Firms, Not Jobs. On the 30th of June, 2026, the financial software company Ramp published research with the workforce data company Revelio Labs. They had done something no one had done before: linked observed corporate spending on AI tools from actual corporate card and bill pay records to actual headcount records. More than 21,000 American firms. The results were striking. Firms that adopt AI grew headcount 10.2% over the 2 years following adoption. The gains came entirely from high-intensity adopters. The top third by AI spend per employee in the first 3 months, around $30 per employee per month early on. Low-intensity adopters showed no statistically significant change at all. And on entry-level workers specifically, the primary report gives 2 figures. Entry-level headcount grew 12% in the high-intensity group, and that group increased its workforce share of entry-level workers by 1.15 percentage points relative to the control group. Those are 2 different quantities, and I want to flag that because in the coverage they get used interchangeably. 12% is a change in the number of people. 1.15 percentage points is a change in the composition of the workforce. A firm could post the first without the second, or the second without the first. Both are in the primary document. Neither is a restatement of the other. Anders Humlum of the University of Chicago put the intuition plainly this week. If we look at the heavy users of these tools, the firms paying a lot of money to Anthropic and OpenAI, they are hiring more than anyone else. Now here is my objection, and it is not about the data quality, which looks excellent. It is about what the study is a study of. The Stanford result is about occupations. The Ramp result is about firms. These are not the same unit, and the difference is not a technicality. It is the entire question. Imagine a fast-growing software company that buys every AI tool available and doubles its headcount. It also stops hiring junior data analysts because a model does that work now and instead hires senior engineers and salespeople. Firm headcount? Up. Entry-level headcount? Possibly also up if the company is growing fast enough. And the occupation of junior data analyst is still being hollowed out across the whole economy, exactly as the payroll data says. Both findings are true at once. They are not in tension because they are not answering the same question. Firm-level growth cannot refute an occupation-level decline any more than a growing city refutes a dying industry inside it. And Ramp says so, in the primary report, in a sentence that almost never survives into the write-ups. AI adopters are already larger, more engineering-intensive, more likely to be venture-backed, and faster-growing than non-adopters. That is a selection effect wide enough to drive the entire result through. Fast-growing venture-backed firms hire more. They also buy more software. Read the coverage anyway, and you will find headlines announcing that AI spending is creating jobs, not killing them, and that new hiring data says no, AI will not kill entry-level jobs. The primary document does not say that. It never claimed to. So where does that leave the actual state of the American labor market? Chapter 7, the Third Dataset. There is a way to break a tie between 2 studies. Find a third, built on different data, by people with no stake in either answer. The Budget Lab at Yale published exactly that on the 7th of May, 2026. Their data source is the Current Population Survey, the Bureau of Labor Statistics household survey that produces the official unemployment rate. Their method is synthetic differences in differences. which builds a custom comparison group for AI-exposed workers out of a weighted blend of unexposed occupations. They're finding no statistically or economically significant effects, as yet, on either employment or wages. You could stop there and declare the alarming story dead. Please do not, because the four most useful paragraphs in this whole literature are the ones where the Budget Lab explains why their own null result might be a mirage. First, the aggregation problem. AI exposure metrics, they write, are not necessarily indicative of a job at risk of automation, but rather a job whose tasks are especially likely to be affected by AI. So, analysis of exposure metrics could actually hide effects if, for instance, half of exposed occupations see their jobs expand and half see their jobs contract. The average could be 0. A null result and a violent reshuffling look identical if you average them. Second, the confound. Listen to how they phrase it. The validity of their approach depends on whether the introduction of large language models can be distinguished from other events, like the rise in remote work, that are closely correlated with exposure to AI. That is the third research team in a row landing on the same rock. Stanford flags it. Warwick builds an entire paper on it. Yale names it as the assumption their design rests on. Third, and this is the one that matters most, statistical power. The current population survey, they note, is best suited to analysis of broad groups and somewhat underpowered for subgroup analysis, like the 22 to 27-year-old recent college graduates that have been a focus of this debate. So the null result is a null result about the whole labor market. It is not evidence of absence for the specific group everyone is arguing about. In their appendix, looking at unemployment, they do see positive effects in the most recent quarter, roughly half a percentage point across the sample, and more for 16 to 34-year-olds. Both statistically insignificant as of the first quarter of 2026. And when they looked at workers 34 and under, they report finding mixed evidence. Meanwhile, the raw facts on the ground are not ambiguous at all. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York's own tracker, in its second quarter 2026 update, reports that labor market conditions remain challenging for recent college graduates. Unemployment for 22 to 27-year-olds with a new bachelor's degree, about 5.6%. Underemployment, 42%. 42%. 2 in 5 recent graduates working a job that does not require the degree they just paid for. So the young graduate labor market is genuinely bad. 3 research teams can see something in the data. None of them can tell you why. Chapter 8, What Would Change My Mind? Let me state my position as plainly as I can, so you can check it later and tell me I was wrong. I think the entry-level decline in AI-exposed occupations is real. 11% of jobs for 22 to 25-year-olds gone from the most exposed end of the labor market between November 2022 and June 2026 in administrative payroll records. That is not a survey artifact, and it is not a vibe. I think the attribution to artificial intelligence is currently unproven, and I think that is not a controversial claim, because the authors of the paper say so themselves in the paper. I think the strongest single piece of evidence against the AI story is the joint estimation in the broken ladder. Run generative AI exposure and work-from-home exposure in the same regression across 243 million hires, and the AI coefficient often becomes statistically indistinguishable from 0. And I think the strongest evidence for the AI story is not the 19%. It is fact 5. The declines concentrate in occupations where AI is used to automate work and not in occupations where it is used to assist. Remote work does not predict that split. Interest rates do not predict that split. That is the one pattern in this entire literature that seems to have AI's fingerprints specifically on it, rather than the fingerprints of everything that happened in white-collar work after 2020. Here is what would move me. Toward AI, a study that finds the same agent automation gradient in a country where remote work never took hold at American scale. Or firm-level evidence that within the same company, after adopting a specific tool, junior hiring in the exposed function fell relative to the unexposed function. Or the divergence continuing to widen through 2027, by which point the remote work shock is 6 years old and should have finished working through the system. Away from AI, the gap stabilizing as return-to-office mandates bite, or Stanford's rerun of the Warwick specification failing to replicate on a second payroll panel, or someone demonstrating that the payroll samples firm composition, which the authors concede may not fully reflect new business formation, is doing the work. One last thing. On the 13th of July, 2026, more than 200 economists and AI researchers, including more than a dozen Nobel laureates, signed a statement organized out of Stanford's Digital Economy Lab. It is 88 words long, and it is built entirely out of hedges. AI may become radically more powerful. This could drive a transformation larger than the Industrial Revolution. It could bring risks, including large-scale job displacement, as well as opportunities. Could. That is the most credentialed group of economists ever assembled on this question, and their collective claim is a conditional. The certainty you encounter downstream, in both directions, was manufactured somewhere between the paper and you. The young people sending 500 applications are not a data problem. They are real, and they are waiting on an answer that the evidence cannot yet give them. The least we can do is stop pretending we already have it.